Hey now, it's Mike Gilbert, host of the Mike and JD Show, right here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Join JD by God Oliva and myself every Thursday night live on the Voices of Wrestling YouTube channel at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as we stay up all night discussing all the hottest stories in professional wrestling. You can also check us out right here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting feed, or you can subscribe to the Mike and JD Show feed. Now, enjoy the show.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Welcome back to Open the Voice Gate for August 20th, 2024. We are members of the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network. You can find us on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network feed or on our own dedicated Open the Voice Gate feed, available on all podcast platforms and applications. You can follow us on Twitter at Open Voice Gate. If you'd like to donate to the show, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to our redcircle.com landing site. You click the red boxes that sponsor this podcast, and you can set up a one-time or recurring donation. No obligation whatsoever, but we would like to thank all of our previous donors. I'm one of your hosts. It's your old pal, Mike Spears, joining alongside, as always, your other host, Case Lowe. We're doing a kind of split episode this week. We're going to have a couple current day topics before we get into the return of Rewind and Rewatch. But Case, before we get into it, I'm just going to cede the floor to you. Right before we got on, you said you had some news for me that you weren't certain I was up on to get my response on. But first, buddy, how's it going?
I'm okay. Mike. It's good to hear from you. We were sort of lamenting our life issues right before we hit record, but in a public setting, how are you doing?
You know, I'm getting through it.
Yeah.
Managed without getting too much into it. House repairs and everything are fun, folks. Like, don't ever do that. Like, just go out into the woods and live off the land. I understand how people go off the grid now, you know. But other than that, my broken toe is basically healed back up. Kiss, in like the perfect like fate that I have a new thing I'm into that I managed to break my toe right before I was getting really deep into it.
Is this what, like adult indoor soccer?
No, it was adult indoor cycling. Like, you know how like Pelotons like took over the world, but they were basically $4,000 just stationary bikes with a screen on it, right?
Yeah.
There are actual like indoor cycling games and simulations that are done, and weirdly, sometimes it's called like esports, but it's like something where people take like their road bike or their own like pre-built, and they attach a power motor to it that's able to tell how much power you generate, and through softwares and Bluetooth you're basically able to race against people. And I broke my toe right before like I was about to start doing my official races.
Did you break your toe doing that, or did it just okay
just general I'm on a real bad luck streak. We'll just leave it at that.
Okay, interesting. I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope that it doesn't derail your future cycling career.
I mean, this is an esport I can get into now.
Of course. Okay, I have Dragongate news that I don't know if you know about.
All right, lay it on me.
Okay. Are you aware that the IWRG YouTube channel has upload retro content, which is actually quite nice.
Right.
They have a pretty amazing archive of stuff that I would assume is just not out there in any sort of, on-demand setting. So this morning they uploaded Yasushi Kanda, Susumu Mochizuki, and the Luchador Neo in a 6-man tag against Super Mega, Skida, and Fantasy. Are you familiar with this match being uploaded? Because I put it on my Twitter last night, but you might not have seen it.
I did see Rob Viper before he started to go off on former AEW managers talk about the Cage Slow special getting uploaded.
Yes. Okay. So very much so. And I hope this is the first of many Toryumon matches that are put on that IWRG YouTube channel. I really have an interest in the Shima stuff in particular because he was just so good from the jump. So I'm hoping that this becomes a trend. But I bring this up because the show that was uploaded, at least I'm assuming this is the show. This is sort of the issue that we're having right now. Myself and Rob Viper are going back and forth as we're recording this. Lucha Database has this show as taking place on December 2nd, 1999, which in storyline tracks. That's definitely when Kanda and Susumu were in Mexico teaming before they turned heel. And we've talked about this, January of 2000, and then formed M2K in the spring of that year. So that makes sense.
Yeah, because this would be either right before or right after they won the Yamaha Cup together down there.
Exactly. So, again, Cage Match does not have this show listed, but IWRG on the Lucha DB, it shows Kanda, Mochizuki, and Neo versus Fantasy Skida and Super Mega. That is absolutely a match that exists. Now, on Lucha Database, and this is why this is noteworthy, the opening match on that show, and I'm going to butcher some names here because they're Spanish names that I didn't practice reading ahead of time. The opening match is Halin and Ryo Saito versus Bestia Rubia and Siki Ozama. That is what's listed on Lucha Database. And again, this is December of 1999. The IWRG upload, it not only has that 6-man tag, but it has a second match tacked onto the front of the video. So when you click on the video, this is what you see first is a singles match between Avisman 2 and Naruki Doi.
That's really early for Doi.
So Doi's official debut is the same as it is for Milano and Yoshino and I think Yashi and Mori maybe. It's May 13th, 2000. This is December of 1999. And it's 100% Naruki Doi. It is so obviously Naruki Doi in the video, but we can't figure out if it's the same show and Doi was in Mexico 5 months before it has ever been reported, or if this is an unlisted IWRG show, because I can't find it in Lucha Database. I can't find it on Cage Match. It was always my impression that Doi was a May of 2000 guy in the same way that all of his contemporaries were. And we could be staring at some Naruki Doi footage that is now from December of 1999.
So Naruki Doi is an interesting one because he was so injured as a rookie.
Yes.
It could very well be, and I am exerting my research capabilities as we are talking about this right now, because that's the way we operate here. It is something where I don't necessarily know if with his injury issues, because he essentially falls into becoming a bridge guy, essentially, and is later than anyone else in the T2P class out of the people who get to debut from the T2P class. What could he be training already before that with his age? Yeah, he could have been in Mexico. He would have been 19. So that would have lined up for that. But that seems to be super early.
It's so odd because, like, we know Saito's the bridge, and we know that, Susumu and Kanda had been in Japan, but then did this Mexico trip, and it played into a giant storyline. And I don't know. I feel like between you, me, and the people we talked to, we should have heard that Doi was in Mexico in 1999 had this been known at all by anybody. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I think, though, that we might be able to figure this out. This does feel like one of those big open-end questions. Like, remember, like, when the Arena Mexico match that, like, emerged, and we were trying to figure out, like, oh, which Saito is this?
Oh, and yes. And the one that, I was like, no, it's very, in the same way that this is very clearly Naruki Doi, that was very, very clearly not Ryo Saito.
Right. It was very clearly Saito, who would later mentor Super Shisa, of course.
Mentor, yes.
Yes. But yeah, no, that I always find like the Mexico period of everyone in Toryumon's career, and that's going to play a lot into our Rewind and Rewatch section later on in the show. I always find that period so fascinating because it does feel like, from interviews and such, a lot of the real strong bonds were formed during that time. Like, that you did your 6 months of training in Japan and then you got to go to Mexico. That's where things came together for that. And the fact that Naruki Doi could have been in Mexico at a time where, I mean, it just much further ahead of his generation is absolutely fascinating. And I think also might lend a little bit of credence to the idea of how injured he was as he started.
Well, yeah, because Doi is obviously there in 2000, and then he basically misses all of 2001. You know, he's not on the T2P debut show. He comes back in spring of 2002, and, you know, from there hit the ground running and really hasn't missed a ton of time ever since. But, yeah, I mean, he's, you know, completely alienated from his class in the same way that, like, Kakuta was. When you had Kento and Kame, you know, running rampant over Japan. Kikuta, obviously, or I'm sorry, Madoka Kakuta. I did what I said in the Discord last night, where you wrote Kakuta and I read it as Kikutaro.
Sorry, my bad.
No, it's all good. But you know, Kakuta had that year off, and by that point, you know, Kame and Kento had grown so much as performers that when Kakuta came back, you know, he didn't relate to them. He wasn't on the same plane as them, and I would argue that even with Kento out of the picture, it's not like Kame and Kakuta feel like they are brothers in arms in terms of their lineage and their career, even if they only debuted like 4 months apart. I don't know. Do you get that feeling like those two don't have any sort of relation in the way that Kame and Kento did?
I mean, there was always like the desire for Kame and Kakuta to have like the big small tag team. Like, that might have been me, though, to be fair.
Oh, I would hope it comes at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was like when Kakuta returned at that Dead or Alive in 2022, it was just very clear, like, the two of them had like no chemistry, and it did not feel like that they were classmates whatsoever.
God, now I'm looking at T2P Mexico stuff.
Sure, yeah.
And this is really the holy grail stuff for me, because February 17th, 2001, there's an elimination match with all of the T2P guys. So it's Yoshino, Milano, Iwasa, Owashi, and Brother Yashi against Saito and Skaida and Mori and Yagi and Oyanagi. And
right.
There's a clipped version of that makes TV. Because I think the final fall, let me see if Cage Match has the final fall here. Yes, it's Milano over Saito in the finals. And so you get like maybe the first 2 minutes of it, and then you get the last 2 minutes of it, but it's a 35-minute match. And I mean, I would kill to see that unclipped. Same with there's a Yoshino Milano singles match from Mexico that I've always been so curious as to how that would look, especially because Yoshino actually goes over in that one over Milano.
Right.
God damn. What a bummer. I really want to see some of this stuff now.
It's something where I just like take like stock of how all of this, and it is the fact that we are doing a rewind and rewatch this week that we both kind of get into the weeds of it. Like, I have been spending the last 2 days off and on Japanese Wikipedia, and
yes, as have I. Yes,
and it's just has been like one of those things where like you're piecing together the Toryumon classes, and it's one of those things where you're just like, oh, okay, we look at all of this, and it's like, man, that 13th class, somehow you ended up with Kazuchika Okada technically being 2 classes ahead of Shingo Takagi and BB Hulk and Akira Tozawa. That's a weird way how that went off to, you know?
And you know, the main topic today is Toryumon X. We're going to do like 5 minutes here on the Fukuoka shows over the weekend, but, you know, you look at the Toryumon X class and you go, oh man, I think if Taiji Ishimori is 2 classes earlier or 2 classes later, he's probably a mainstay in Dragongate to this day. And he was just in the worst possible timeline.
Right. And when you look at like how people lined up, and if the big thing of like if the split never happened, you know, all of that stuff. But you end up with a 15th class that could have been very easily Shingo Takagi, BB Hulk, Akira Tozawa. Technically, Kazuchika Okada is a class before them, but very easily, given his age, he ends up like staying in school for like another year or so. He then counts as a 13th. He'd be in the 15th class. And then, of course, then Kota Ibushi. Like there was a chance that if we had the sliding doors moment, like we wouldn't joke around about Tadasuke being the random person in that class. You're talking perhaps about one of the greatest influxes of wrestling talent in the modern era.
And I would argue that even with just Tozawa, Shingo, and Hulk, you have that.
Yeah, I mean, it is so fun how everything has kind of changed over the last 6 years and how we talk about things and how the history, I feel like in a lot of ways, there was parts of Dragon System history that you just did not talk about. Like for a long time, it was like, oh, Shingo Takagi was like a private student was the company line. And instead it was like, no, yeah, they were all Toryumon students, of course.
Yeah, he just missed the window to go to Mexico.
Right. Yeah. But like, I mean, we could both like have enough stories and emails
Brother,
and conversations.
I got worked on the Shingo thing worse than anybody. You know?
Yeah,
trust me, I live with the guilt of it.
So it's one of those things that weeks like this kind of let us, in a way, we get to re-explore and also like spend time with a very interesting time in pro wrestling. We'll be talking about 2003 and the Toryumon X landing. But Case, we had a double shot in Fukuoka on Sunday. Busy day in the wrestling world, August 18th, but 2 Dragongate shows, you know, the usual afternoon and evening program there in the Across Fukuoka venue. Do you want me to go down the card results real quick and then we go through our quick thoughts on this?
Yeah, go over the afternoon real quick. I have more to say on the afternoon than the evening show.
Valid. On the afternoon show, we opened with Genki Horiguchi, Yasushi Kanda, and Toru Washi versus Ultimo Dragon and Madoka Kakuta and Dragon Daya. Daya wins after the DDT on Genki. Ultimo and Genki shenanigans was at a peak during this match. Rita versus Ishin was a singles match in match 2. This was an interesting one where Rita just completely lost his chill and was just honed in on Kota Minoura the entire time, and Ishin just basically picks up the pieces. Rita gets his ass kicked, basically, and then Ishin comes in and just wipes the deck clean of him. Match 3, Mochi Fuji reunite against Big Hug Hyo and Jackie Kamei. Kamei with the Jackie knife gain the win there. Yamato versus Jason Lee. We got a Frankensteiner of the Almighty for Yamato to win, but the bigger story, and really the story of the Fukuoka doubleheader, was the Ishin and Yamato storyline reaching a fever pitch as Ishin basically at every point attacked the guy and was able to basically completely lay out Yamato the same way that Rita was laid out. And then Jason Lee picked him apart until with the Frankensteiner of the Almighty. Semi-main event, Natural Vibes, Strong Machine J, KZ, Big Boss Shimizu, UT versus Paradox, No Hug, Naruki Doi, Dragon Kids, Asumi Yokosuka, and Kagatora. Yokosuka Cutter on UT. And then Gold Class versus Z-Brats in the main event, BB Hulk, Benkei Mochizuki Jr. versus Shun Skywalker Kai, and the newly heel Kota Minoura. It was a cookie sheet Golden Rose on Junior to end the afternoon session.
Ishin versus Rita was one of the best things Dragongate has done this year.
Just incredibly effective.
I mean, one of the best, it's a 3-minute match. I'll call it an angle. One of the best angles I've seen in all of wrestling this year. And in a larger point, I started thinking about this with Triple Mania over the weekend, because obviously we all know AAA is bad, but I started thinking about CMLL and how, for me last year, they were very comfortably the promotion of the year. And I think in my head, because of the drawing record that Mystico has had, and because he's been in some great matches, and because there's been some really high-level CMLL stuff this year, and we've got Grand Prix coming up this weekend, which I'm ecstatic about, I think in my head, up until these Fukuoka shows, I was like, oh yeah, CMLL's promotion of the year, and then, I guess it's probably Dragongate, and then I've really liked Noah, but I respect what All Japan's done, and, I guess if you take the best parts of AEW, they deserve to be in the conversation. But I don't know. I know I'm the one saying this, and I'm saying it on a Dragongate podcast, and so it might induce eye rolls, but Dragongate's been the best promotion of 2024, right? It's not only the high-end stuff with some of the Dreamgate matches, some of the Rey de Pareja stuff, the cage match, but we've seen without that one catastrophically big angle, there hasn't been the unit disbands match where women and children are crying and there was an emotional post-match promo. We don't have, unless I'm forgetting something obvious, the one explosive angle. Command Heel. All right, I'll put it on the board. So we even have that. But just throughout the year, there's all these little things that if you sit back and think about it, the world moves too quick to remember 3-minute matches in Fukuoka. But when you start to tabulate where we are 8 months into the year, I don't think any promotion all around has been better than Dragongate this year.
Yeah, and it's something that for me, at least with my viewing patterns, I always save Dragongate for last because I come away from it always in the best mood.
Of course.
And part of that also is planning, keeping things more fresh in the mind when we record. Like, that's just a fact of the matter that if you watch something more recent, then you're going to have more fresh mind even as we take notes. But the company feels complete right now in a way that there have been some injury issues, and I think that whole dialogue about that last year, that it kind of petered out this one. But you look at how complete, at least for me, the how the first 6 months they gave to Big Hug and Jack Kamei and the storyline leading up into the cage match, and how they executed using an Apuestas loss as a way to take Kyo into a new stratosphere and do one of the more compelling just babyface to babyface turns of allegiances that you'll ever see in wrestling.
Well, also really heating up Jason Lee as a heel.
Yeah, really heating up Jason Lee as a heel. Absolutely. And then now we have this overall Gold Class versus Z-Brats, where Z-Brats is now at a point where they are the 5-man unit and there's no weakness on the roster of the 5-man unit. And at least as the way they portrayed it, I think if you take the top 5 in most heel units throughout Dragon System history, and really it might be like between them and Berserk or Blood Warriors, just for the sake of Blood Warriors being half the roster at that time, you got to have naturally a higher top 5. But you're looking at those to look at like a stronger 5-man group as a Rudo army. And after the show, you definitively built up Yamato versus Ishin at the September Korakuen. And we know that Rita and Kota Minoura, and really Kota Minoura and the remainder of Gold Class is still like the pressing issue. And I think that was really strong on a show that, I will be blunt about this weekend's show, that was basically what all happened on the weekend was these two storylines.
Well, which is all, it's all you need to get over. Yeah. It's, look, ultimately, we are, I say this with the DNC in Chicago, I'll be topical. We are the radical left when it comes to Dragongate. Nobody's going to listen to us and go, oh yeah, they are the promotion of the year. It takes the Puro Bubble centrist to make that difference. But I don't know, man, we're pretty deep into the year, and I really couldn't take seriously an argument for New Japan being in the conversation. If you want to vote for All Japan, I get it. Dragongate is more successful than Noah, and I think they've not only outclassed them on the show-in, show-out basis of like, every Dragongate show is pretty good, if not great, but also the high-end stuff, for as much as I've enjoyed Noah this year, the Dragongate stuff is just better. And I think they've put on more compelling stories than CMLL this year. And it's worth noting, again, because of the context of this podcast, CMLL was my promotion of the year in 2023. It was anybody but Dragongate in 2022. 2021 would have been a toss-up between Dragongate and AEW, and I think I would have leaned AEW. So it's been a very long time since I felt that they are the best promotion in the world. But I think they're there right now, and part of what you said there about, there's a certain level of fulfillment you get from this promotion right now. There's a certain level of completeness among the roster. It goes back to what I said last week. Look at all the champions. Yamato's a super engaging Dreamgate champion. The Twin Gate champions are great. The Triangle Gate champions are great. Daya is the right Brave Gate champion in this moment in time. It's the most satisfying group of champions we've had in years and years and years.
Yeah, and I think that also kind of coincides with, we have units on the way up, we have units on the way down, but where the titles are on, like, as much as I, over the last 3 months, have had the open question of what is Strong Machine J's natural vibes, that is not a unit that is teetering towards its conclusion, whereas there might have been times earlier this year where I was like, maybe it's time, natural vibes, we kind of get a move on for some of these people. You have the champions like Paradox, brand new unit, working for that. D-Courage, you have the Daya after the best of the Super Juniors, the right guy to move it on to, because it's very clear, especially in this Fukuoka show, that Hyo is still sickeningly over to the extent of it's like, oh, yeah, I do have to fast forward 2 minutes for him to go get all of his Hyo dollars, because that bit somehow does not die.
No, you're exactly right. And as for the Ishin Rita match, which was the thing that sort of kicked all this off, it was great. It was 3 minutes. Rita comes out first. Ishin gets in the ring. Rita blows right past him on his way to attack Minoura. And it's basically this 2-on-1 match where Ishin wants to beat up Rita, but Rita wants to beat up Minoura. And they do it in this way that is so clever, and it fits the Rita... his approach to wrestling so well, where he's like too hot to handle, too slippery for Ishin, but he gets distracted by Minoura, and it ends up with, Minoura just braining him with the cookie sheet, and then Ishin getting the pin with 1 foot on his chest, looking like a dominant title contender. In 3.5 minutes, you can't drum up better business than this, where you elevate the Minoura and Rita stuff, which feels really hot. You have Ishin look super dominant, but you also, you don't sacrifice Rita as a result of Ishin looking dominant, which is kind of, honestly, it was what I was afraid they were going to do. And I'm not sure if this match happens in 2022, the same exact setting, the same exact scenario, if Ishin doesn't just squash Rita and kind of cool the flames of what he has going on with Minoura. This was all perfectly executed to where Ishin's hotter, Rita's hotter, Minoura's hotter, and their individual feuds all feel bigger now. Again, one of the best things I have seen in wrestling this year. I would kill for other promotions to be this efficient at, again, for lack of a better term, even though it was built as a match, an angle. I love this.
Yeah, like as like a point of contrast, this has similar beats. It's not the same story, of course, as like Toni Storm and Mariah May. This is the kind of thing that, like, if you plug this into that story, like Toni Storm, like just completely losing it and not being able to like focus and getting beat down basically because she has to, face Mariah May on the outside versus whoever she would have been in the ring with. Like, I know this isn't a 1-to-1 example. Everyone would be lionizing this, or at least the people who still tolerate Timeless Toni Storm would be lionizing this. Right?
Very much so.
The evening session
real
was
quick. Real quick. What do you think of the main event?
I thought the main event was a lot of fun. I do have one big qualm about Minoura as a heel now. I think that he really, in a lot of ways, is able to kind of like sink into this character because he's not necessarily ever been the most emotive wrestler as a babyface.
Yep.
And Gold Class at times were heelish to begin with. One thing, not a fan of, I don't want him to be a t-shirt wrestler. It was like visibly distracting him in a t-shirt. Like, I know that when you're a heel, you don't have to do like the fan appeal. You don't have to like go like work on the glamour muscles. I mean, Jason's eating well right now. I don't blame him. He doesn't have to worry about.
Well, he's bulking. He's getting bigger and bigger.
Right. Like, I mean, yes, we know there's a pad in there, but have you seen the state of Shun's ass? Like, it's just one of those things. Like, when you're a heel, you don't have to concern about appealing to the fans. And I feel like with Kota Minoura, like seeing him in the Zebrats t-shirt kind of swallowed him up in a way that I was just like, man, this is someone who already had issues necessarily like with the character work side of his game. Having him in that Zebrats t-shirt did definitely kind of draw my attention up. Is that a weird thing for me to fixate on? I feel like that there were parts about him in this match that were great and what I wanted to see, but then like there were moments that just felt very abstract and maybe like that, like not rising to a moment of him as a heel, I guess.
I felt the exact opposite. I have in my notes, I'm elated that he's a t-shirt guy now. I think that's exactly what he should be doing. He should be hiding the muscles. He should be, maybe not to the degree that Ishin is, but he should be getting a little bit wider. This is great.
Put on some pants.
This is exactly what he should be doing. I'm all for it. Now, if it comes Gate of Destiny, let's say, and he's in a Twin Gate match or a Triangle Gate match, take the t-shirt off. For Fukuoka in an 8-man brawl like this, I am A-okay with him being a t-shirt wrestler.
I think some of it also is the t-shirt in short tights. Like, that's always been a very awkward thing to me.
That's fair, but that didn't bother me. I like that he was in the t-shirt.
Completely. And the thing is that his work in the match as a heel, it's going to work out for him long term. I just kind of, in a way, like he's not always like the guy that is able to emote the best there. Should we move on to the evening show real quick?
Last note on the afternoon show, because I have nothing to add on the evening show. You can read the results and we can move on. How about those Junior and Shun interactions in the main event of that afternoon show? Just something to keep an eye on. Something, they're both naturally great and have been since the start of their career. It's no surprise their chemistry. We're cooking with gas here.
Oh, there's something there. Like, there was never any question that there would be something there, but I mean, I'm just ready for the point that Shun's just going to go on a diatribe about being a daddy's boy. Basically, it's going to happen.
I know we have so much to get to. Here's a take for you to maybe sit on for a second. I don't know if I need an answer right now.
Okay.
In Fukuoka over the weekend, Coach Minoru's first televised show as a member of Zebrats, did Gold Class feel hotter than they ever have before?
They weirdly kind of feel like it's like, oh, like this is chapter 2 of Gold Class in a weird way.
It made me go, oh, this is Gold Class. This is what I've been waiting on.
Like, they still probably are going to rename themselves.
And they should.
And they should. And I think that it has to kind of become, that has to become Benkei's unit, right? Like that's the long and short of it. Sucks for Junior just getting brand new gear made. Maybe they keep the same colors. Like, you can do that, but I think you have to do the rename, and I think you do it. Like the biggest tell is the fact that Rita has still never bothered with new gear. Like, he's probably going to, at that September Korakuen, come out with new gear, or if they announce the rebrand, they will do that there. But it really is something where, especially like now they do like the hop on the hard cam pose, and especially if like Junior and Hulk up there for that, or even like Ben and Rita on the evening show, I was like, all right, no, that's Gold Class, baby.
That's Gold Class. I love it. All right, evening show real quick, and then we can move on.
All right, Natural Vibes versus D Courage. The Vibes side was SMJ, Shimizu, and UT. UT with the Fuego again. The Fuego on Ryoya Tanaka. Tanaka looking really good there in this match, as he usually does. KZ defeats Genki Horiguchi with a running elbow smash. This was a real goof off fest. Like this, it felt like the comedy match. Of course, this was the night before one of the Genki Horiguchi exciting series matches in Kunamoto. So popped the top off. He was ready to go. Vets and Gold Class. You had Misaki Mochizuki, Don Fuji, and Toru Owashi versus Ultimo Dragon, BB Hulk, and Mochizuki Jr. Mochi Fuji versus Junior was just the story of this match, and just trying to like Junior trying to get bow up against his dad and his best friend. Owashi though wins with the choke slam on Junior. Ben Rita reunite versus Minoru and Jason Lee reuniting. So Benkei and Rita versus Kota Minoru and Jason Lee. A big brawl fest ends with a Golden Rose on Rita. Hyo and Jack Kamei versus Not Hug. It is a doable on Kamei for the finish. And then your main event, the Dreamgate preview. Yamato, Susumu Yokosuka, and Kagatora Paradox. Shun Skywalker, Kai, and Ishin. It was Ishin with the Jinchu on Yamato. They are really heavily going towards Ishin dominating in the lead up to.
Love it. Very fun show. 2 very easy watches. I would really recommend diving into both of them.
Yeah, the nice thing about the Across Fukuoka double shots are it's basically 2 hours. Like it is the tightest show you will get, and you're able to kind of almost set your watch to it. There was a future match on the night show. I forgot to mention it. Dai Tsuchiguchi versus Amare Kato. It was fine. Kato's debut is coming up in 2 weeks.
Absolutely. Real quick, I know you want to talk about the Shingo thing. I want to note here the Kobe Sambo Hall show.
Right. Geita Miyane.
Yes, this weekend. it has sold out in advance. And if I remember correctly from the tweet that I translated this morning, they are looking to add additional room to expand the seating capacity just beyond the walk-up sales that they're permit on the day of. I cannot remember a time since I've been covering Dragongate, which is coming up on, it'll be 10 years next year, where a Kobe Sambo Hall show has sold out in advance. And if it was a Kobe Sambo Hall show that sold out in advance, I would imagine it would be the Fan Appreciation Show in December, which always does really well. This, and it's not, I've been told from people in the area, it's not the New Japan guys. It's not that they don't matter. It's the host of this show. It's whatever TV guy they have coming in is apparently a way bigger deal than we all realized. And this show is going to be a big, big deal.
Yeah, and they've been building up this host and Shun Skywalker since like basically the beginning of this year.
Yep.
So this has been a big build up for it. And even the show itself, it looks like a whole lot of fun. Should we run down the card before we talk about the Shingo Homecoming show real quick?
Yeah, let's do it quickly.
So this will be on Sunday. This is on the Dragongate network. We will talk about that and Naruki Doi's Homecoming next week. We open Big Boss Shimizu versus Cyber Kong. That's right, Cyber Kong. Then we go to Susumu Yokosuka, Madoka Kakuta, and Rita versus Ultimo Dragon, Dragon Kid, and Luis Monte. So we're getting some lucha versus heavy hitters and Scrapper Die. The Miyani Rebel, Genki Horiguchi, Sachi Okoboy, Kagatora, Problem Dragon, Punch Tominaga, UT, La Estrella, and what's likely one of his last Dragon Gate appearances before he goes back to the States. He'll come back later for the Mass Band tournament.
Do we know, is he coming back or is he staying?
I mean, he says that he got his visa and that he is looking, and he was like taking dates.
Yeah, but this might be a Dennis Stamp situation. He might not be booked. He might be in Japan through October.
That is fair. Yeah. That is fair. But as well as Estrella, we have Ryoya Tanaka, Ho-Ho Lone, and Kai in the Miyane Rumble. Daiki Yanagiuchi versus Kota Minoura is your special singles match on this show. KZ, Jason Lee, Jackie Kamei. What am I saying? Former, at one time, former members of Natural Vibes, now all three in separate units after the events of this year, versus the second generation All-Stars, Strong Machine J, Ishin, and Mochizuki Jr. Match 6, Handsome Guys versus Old Guys 8-man tag, Yamato, BB Hulk, Hyo, and Dragon Daya versus Masaki Mochizuki, Don Fuji, Yasushi Kanda, and Taru Nohashi. In our main event, Benkei with the Great Okan versus Shun Skywalker and Bushi.
Awesome looking show. Really excited for it.
Yeah, like I do wish, and I understand why this is not the case and how everything like kind of works with these kinds of things. I want to know like what is the backstory somehow between Benkei and Great Okan, because they would line up with like collegiate wrestling in it.
Yeah, that's a good one for next time Jay's on, which when we get into Toryumon X, I will let you know why we're going to have Jay on sooner rather than later, because we had an interesting email exchange
Yes.
over the weekend. But that is something for the list. You're right. I would love to know more about that.
But that is the upcoming show this weekend. They don't really have a card out for the Nara show, but we'll talk about those next week. One last note, Dragon System alumnus, 15th term member Shingo Takagi has his 20th anniversary coming up on October 7th in his hometown, Yamanashi, Japan. We have a card at this point announced, and interesting things on this. Rita, who is a Yamanashi native, will be making an appearance, and there's a big giant X amongst all of the LIJ in Shingo's main event. A couple particulars before we kind of talk about this, because this has been a real thing of buzz, at least in the Voices of Wrestling Discord. Okay, so I feel like that there's certain things that we have to like make clear to the listeners, but when we talk about who potentially might be the fated X.
It's weird that there's an X.
Absolutely.
I don't get what they're going for. The show is already sold out. I don't understand the logic behind it. I feel in my gut very strongly it is not Yamato.
Yeah.
Look, it makes sense why it would be Yamato. It's not Yamato.
And one of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons why, if you're going with a chalk answer, Yamato would be your guess. First, I mean, he's the champion. He's the face that runs the place. October 7th is Ryo Saito's homecoming show. It is in, I'm blanking on where he is from, but
As some small village somewhere.
Yeah, it not Yamanashi is the point, basically.
Yes.
And is this a situation where the ace doesn't have to be at the general manager's homecoming show? Probably not. But unless there's a good reason, Yamato is going to be on that show for Ryo Saito. And more importantly, if Yamato is doing that match, there's a big old issue that Dragongate, there's an informal edict. If you're the Dreamgate champion, what do you not do when you're in other companies?
Take pinfalls.
And that would be an issue, I feel like, in this sort of circumstances. If it's going to be someone on the roster, my dark horse picks is Madoka Kakuta. Like,
Kakuta's definitely an option because they have the history going back to Final Gate. BB Hulk, obviously, an option.
An option that I feel like, other than vibes, is suggested by people who haven't really kept up with BB Hulk.
No, but I mean,
they can make it work. It's
a 6-man tag on a glorified house show. You know, I'm not worried about him going 2008 BB Hulk.
Dude, the last time they had an LIJ versus LIJ glorified house show match, they went 30 minutes.
I say, when was that?
Adachi, that at Naito and Bushi's hometown. They did LIJ versus LIJ. They went time limit draw, and it was like 30 minutes nonstop.
I missed
Hulk
that.
Can't
Interesting.
do that. Hulk
was that a good match?
Yeah, it was great. I was 4.5 on it.
Was that this year?
Yeah, it was before the G1. It was like right before it.
I have zero knowledge of this. That's amazing. I'm going to have to go back and watch that match. Good to know.
But I think that because the rest of the match, with the exception of Teton, basically they've taken that match and they've switched up the teams, but instead of Teton, you have the X. And I just don't think that you can hide. I think BB Hulk, I don't want to say you could hide. That sounds very dismissive of him. BB Hulk can do like the house show main event, but he can't do the 30-minute go, everyone, we're doing this time limit draw. So I just think it's a bad idea. So yes, but I think that it's 2024, basically.
I think you and I are both in agreement. We think it's more likely that it won't be a Dragongate guy than it will be a Dragongate guy.
I'm of the belief it's like, I've said this in the Discord, I think it will be Daisuke Sakamoto. I'm pretty convinced it'll be him, too.
And why do you think that?
Because whenever Shingo would do his Wilderness Wandering when he was part of the Dragongate roster, more often than not, he would be doing Big Japan stuff, and he'd be teaming with Okabayashi and Sakamoto.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're clearly boys. You know, it's the kind of thing that Sakamoto would be brought in for. It fits kind of what his booking profile is at this point. I was going through... also, some people said Ricochet. It's not going to be Ricochet. That's New Japan...
Come on,
Ricochet's
guys.
too valuable to New Japan to do that. That's why that's not happening. I was going through Shingo's old homecoming shows when he was in Dragongate, and that became, once they started doing those, which was like 2013, that became a thing. You know, he teamed with Mutoh, and he teamed with Fujinami, and he teamed with Masato Tanaka, and they brought in those guys, and that's kind of who I think it's going to be. I think it's going to be Tatsumi Fujinami, which doesn't lend itself well to the argument you made about why it couldn't be BB Hulk, but it's Fujinami. Who says they have to go 30 minutes? Who says Fujinami has to be involved the entire time? My vote is going to be Tatsumi Fujinami.
I like your justification there. Why not?
It's New Japan, it's Fujinami, it's Shingo. I know Fujinami's not from that area, but he'll get a pop when he comes out.
Right, yeah, and then you have Dragon and all of that.
Yeah, that's where I think they're going with that. You know, it would be super cool if it was Hulk. It'd be super cool if it was Yamato. It'd be super cool if it was Mochizuki. But it's not going to be one of those guys. You know, they luck into Saito's homecoming show being that day where you don't have to have your top of the line guys in that main event. It can be Saito and Ultimo and Genki versus Mochi and Fuji and Punch, you know, whatever. But
yeah, I mean, that's what I expect it to be. It's going to be like a Toryumon reunion match with the exception of probably Yamato involved.
Yeah, exactly. So I think you and I are both in the minority here. We lean non-Dragongate guy. You think it's Daisuke. I think it's Fujinami. It could be Masato Tanaka. there's like a 1% chance it's Keiji Muto.
Can't deny it. Can't take it out of this.
Can't deny it. Can't deny it. And I think BB Hulk is probably the Dragongate favorite, but I would put Sekimoto as a more likely option than him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But we will keep up on this. Now our picks are in audio, and that lives forever, Case. So
it does. I'm looking forward to it.
No backsies, but I think it is now time. We went longer than I thought about that, but it is time to talk about Toryumon X. Case. It is 2003 and 2002 we are talking about. I'm going to yield the floor to you. Let's talk about Toryumon X and its landing, Taiji Ishimori, and all that's in between.
Mike, I have exactly an hour at most to break down Toryumon X. I do apologize that my current living situation, meaning my permanent living situation, means that I can't always go 2.5 hours anymore if time would permit. But I've got an hour. Let's talk Toryumon X. When I say the words Toryumon X to you, Mike, what is the thing that comes to mind?
I think Sailor Boys. I think
yes.
I think the curse. I think the idea that everything was happening. Ultimo trying to make moves before his WWE stint and trying to keeping a foothold. I think about Hisamaru Tajima. I think about Los Carros Exoticos, and I exclusively think about Los Salseros Japoneses.
Los Salseros Japoneses, good group. Perhaps
the highlight, one might say.
Well, we'll talk about the highlight. Here's the thing. We're going to go through the timeline here. We're going to spend a lot of time on the timeline. And that is primarily because when I went back and rewatched the Toryumon X debut show, which is what we're breaking down today, the creation of Toryumon X and the debut show, what I came away from is that the debut show is really boring.
It kind of sucks.
But it's not even that bad. That's the problem, is that it's no Toryumon landing. It's certainly no T2P, but it also, like, for audio purposes, I wish the show would have been worse. It's just a boring show.
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think really like what's put on display in this. So we're actually almost 21 years to the day of the Toryumon X landing. It was at Differ Ariake with a claimed attendance of 1750 on August 22nd, 2003. I think a lot of like everything about like the trappings of Toryumon X, the fact that this happened at Differ Ariake has to be mentioned. We talked about at the start of the year, King of Dragon, the Toryumon Japan landing, how vibrant Korakuen Hall has been. We've talked about in the past the Toryumon 2 T2P. I'm going to butcher the name of the show. It begins with a D, but when they drop the curtain, you see the 6-sided ring. Everyone was blown away by that show. I think just the fact that this was in Differ Ariake starts you off on the bad foot.
That's a very good point. And I think we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but I'll say this now. In the same way that on the Toryumon debut show, the 6-man tag main event is the platter of look at what we have to offer the world. And on the T2P debut show, the 6-sided ring unveiling is the platter that says, look at what we have to offer the world. Do you think that in Ultimo's mind, the Sailor Boys entrance song and dance was the equivalent of the 45-minute 6-man tag or the debut of the 6-sided ring? Is that what in his mind, when he's writing this show down on paper, he's going to go 21 years from now, 2 white dudes in America are going to live, laugh, and love, remembering fondly this entrance song and dance?
I think it was one of those things with Ultimo that he is like, for all warts and all, Ultimo Dragon is a creative force.
Very much so. I wish there were more Ultimo minds in wrestling.
Yeah, imagine if Ultimo Dragon got the latitude that Conan got.
God, like, I wish I had the latitude Conan got. Good lord.
Right, man. I mean, that's living life.
I could do some numbers in AAA, let me tell you.
Hey, I might need you to in private slap me down about shows next year. We'll just put it that way.
Isn't it such a bummer that Laredo Kid is still on that roster? Like, I remember that over the weekend. I was like, oh, I love Laredo Kid. Like, what a wrestler he is. Why hasn't he left like everybody else?
Missy C's Jr., I adored before he took that hood. Like, I was a big Angel Delvino guy. Like, that's Missy C's Jr., not Angelical, right?
I believe so.
Otherwise, I like, because it was like all of the when they were doing like the lookout contest, like their version of Busca del Idolo, basically, like all of those like really undercard guys like Abismo Jr. and all that. Those there were like really talented guys on that show in this company, and they just have to suck there because apparently trolling is considered good heat.
Very much so. Anyways, Ultimo's mind.
Yeah, Ultimo's mind, especially think about 2002, because that's really when Taiji Ishimori, and we'll talk about the events leading up to the show, Taiji Ishimori was kind of picked as the guy that the company was going to be based on, or the brand was. 2002, like it or not case, I was in high school in 2002. Boy bands were a huge deal. Mm-hmm. I get why Ultimo went that way, and especially with a guy like Taiji Ishimori, and at least at that time, Shu and Kei Sato made sense as like the backup for those two. If you're going to like see the trappings, and if you understand Ultimo's mind, and when he's talked about characters, when other people have talked about gimmicks Ultimo's come up with, makes perfect sense why Sailor Boys would be a great idea. But it's also something that with that kind of gimmick, no matter what, there was going to be such a short lifespan for that. It just like, even if Toryumon X ended up like being somewhat of a success, like not even like being able to prolong Ultimo's tenure and it not becoming Dragongate, just like an ongoing concern, like after the split, you would have had to do something about the Sailor Boys because there's such a short lifespan for this kind of gimmick.
I think that's very, very well put. So we can put a pin in that. We can come back to Sailor Boys thoughts later. I have a lot of thoughts on Ishimori individually that we can get to at some point throughout this timeline. But Mike, are you ready to start the Toryumon X timeline?
Buddy, my body is ready.
All right, April 22nd, 2002, the El Numero Uno 2002 finals. It is announced that the Toryumon X project has begun, which takes us a few weeks later to Mexico. May 12th, 2002, Toryumon X makes their first public appearance on the Toryumon Mexico 5th anniversary show. This includes debuts for Taiji Ishimori, Fumiyuki Hashimoto, who we now know as Kagetora, Koa, I'm going to always butcher his name, the man we now know as Toru Nohashi, Arakencito, as he will be referred to from here on out. So Ishimori, Kagetora, Toru Nohashi, and Hisamaru Tajima. We go back to the Wayback Machine, to the Toryumon USA website, which predated iHeartDG. This is Jay's writing, but from March 27th, 2002, where he says, we have the full card for the Toryumon anniversary show on May 11th. A student named Hisamaru Tajima will be debuting, and he is getting a lot of hype and is being called, quote, Ace of the Future. From what I gather, he is graduating early as an honor student from the gym. On that May 12th show, Tajima debuted against Toru Owashi. And I did not know this until doing notes for this show. This is what I already think is so interesting about the history of Toryumon X. Allegedly, the story going into this match was that Owashi, who was a T2P guy, was so much bigger than the rest of T2P, which he was. I mean, even if you look at like 2002 Kondo, he's not as big as he would get. You know, he's bigger than most, but you know, Owashi was so much bigger than everybody else that he challenged the Toryumon X class to be full of power fighters to match the size and the presence that Owashi brought to the table. So Tajima debuts against him. He loses in 11 minutes to a choke slam, which is worth noting because this was his debut match, match number 1. He went 11 minutes and he didn't lose to a half crab. He didn't lose to a camel clutch. He lost to a full-on finishing move. That is the level of hype that Hisamaru Tajima came in with, Mike.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that famously, Tajima was a scholarship student. Yes. Ultimo was so impressed by this guy in his tryout that Ultimo said, "You're not paying. You're with me. I'm covering your room. Your board. I believe in you." And in the years past and in the lead up, it was very clear that Toryumon X was going to be based on like this power fighting or more of a brawly kind of thing. And it was going to be based around Ultimo's new favorite student, Hisamaru Tajima.
Crazy. So we go to August 3rd, 2002. This is still in Mexico. This is the first time that any sort of Toryumon X footage ever made tape. This is on Dragongate Network. All this stuff we're going to talk about, minus the All Japan show that we'll get to, all of this stuff is on the network now, so you can follow along as we go. This is the August 3rd Toryumon Mexico show, and sadly, we don't get Tajima versus Murcielago, and we don't get Yoshini and Yoshino versus Anthony W. Mori and Taiji Ishimori. We do, however, get Small Dandy Fuji, which we now know as Rase,
yeah.
Rase, and Suicito, who is now Kagatora, against Sashihoko Machines 1, 2, and 3 in what is a very long and very dry comedy match.
Yeah, so just so folks know, Sachihoko 1 through 3, the wrestler we now know as Sachihoko Boy was Sachihoko Machine 2. There were a lot of people that were essentially working as Sachihoko Machines. I mean, y'all know how that goes. But really, 1 through 3 were the big stars. There was a 4 and a 5, but there was a 4 and then another 4. One of those 4s was Masato Yoshino for a time. But 1 and 3 were soon to be known as Brahman K and Brahma Shu, the Sato twins.
So on that show, like I said, the opening match was Tajima versus Murcielago, who we'll obviously talk about because Murcielago did the training, debuted in Toryumon X, another fascinating wrestler. But this match was the last match that Tajima would wrestle in Toryumon Mexico. After this show, he would go home, despite, like you said, Mike, having a full scholarship to the Ultimo Dragon Gym in Mexico. He would leave Mexico, he would go back to Japan and help his family run their noodle restaurant, which is in Tokyo. Jay goes over all of that. I went back and rewatched this. Tajima shows up in the Dragon Scramble Battle Royal on the first Toryumon reunion show right before the pandemic, and that's where Jay starts to tell the Tajima story about how he went back and worked at this restaurant. I should also note before I throw it back to you, so I emailed Jay, and I was like, hey man, I knew nothing about Tajima before I started doing research for this. I missed your anecdote in the Battle Royal that you mentioned. I had no knowledge of this guy, and I obviously consider myself to be pretty up on this stuff. What else can you tell me about Tajima? And Jay said it. I did not tell this to you, Mike, but I think you'll find this interesting because you've known Jay as long as I have. Jay said, remind me to talk about Tajima next time I'm on the podcast. I have a ton of Tajima stories. That is interesting because I've known Jay for a decade, and at no point has he ever seemed excited to tell stories. So I can't wait to figure out what he has to say about Tajima.
Yeah, like the only time that he's been like excited to talk about like a past thing is like a Kness thing.
Very much so. So I we'll have Jay on soon because this is one of the great what ifs in Dragon Gate history. You know, if Tajima's there as a heavyweight, and I think more so than any other time in the Dragon System history from the first class to now, I think Toryumon X had a size issue that I'll explain once we get to the debut show, but they had a size issue that they could never really overcome. And if it's Tajima leading this army into battle in the same way that Milano led T2P, in the same way that Magnum led the original class, Mike, this could be a totally different story. Toryumon X could feel like it belonged in the Dragon System lineage and that it wasn't this weird black mark that even people like myself really don't know a ton about.
Yeah, and the thing about Tajima also, Ultimo never gave up on Tajima.
Correct.
If you go and look at his wrestling career, he did wrestle not a ton, not a full-time wrestler, but enough to almost fill up a full cage match profile page between 2002 and 2020. Most notably, most interestingly, at least to me, when UD Casa starts up, when UD06, when Ultimo is running shows with the remainders of his Toryumon Mexico roster, he gets Tajima back into it. And Tajima kind of has a little bit, it's never more than like a weekend a month. It's never more than maybe 10 matches a year. He gets a little bit of an indie career, mostly, weirdly enough, in the tradition promotion.
Well, and he does a handful of New Japan lockup shows, which is incredibly odd. The first one makes sense because you look at the match, it's Tajima, Milano, and Naoki Tanizaki versus Taichi, Tetsuya Naito, and Yujiro. I don't think that match is on tape, which is a bummer on a number of levels because I really, really want to see that match. But then he comes back a year later in 2008, and it's Arashi, Tajima, and Yutaka Yoshie versus Akira Rikichoshu and Shiro Koshinaka, and the Tajima team goes over in that match.
Yeah, the Legend trio there.
Good Lord. Yeah, this tradition stuff is interesting because some of this would have made tape. I've never said this before. I'm going to have to track down some tradition.
Yes. Love to hear it. Love to hear it. Actually, I have a match I want you to hunt down because I feel like it is the most bizarre thing ever that I'm looking at right now. Is
it this Lucha Fiesta match?
No.
Okay, which one is it?
This is a Tenryu Project match. Mineo Fujita and Nasawa Rongai versus Hisamaru Tajima and Mitsuo Momoda.
Oh God, I don't want to do that. God, he even worked in Mexico in 2012 on one of the Dragon Mania shows. You're right. Ultimo never gave up on this guy.
Ultimo loved him. I mean, it's like him and O'Hara are like the two guys that Ultimo never really gave up on. I guess technically, I'm blanking on his name now. Secret base guy, Hanaoka. Hanaoka is the other one. He never gave up on.
Well, did he not give up on Kenoka, or did he not remember Kenoka?
No, Hanaoka.
Oh, you're right. Ultimo never gave up on him.
Yeah, no, Kenoka. I don't know if Ultimo would be able to pick him up.
No, that's the story from the first Awashi Produce show. Is they had all the Ultimo guys on that show, and Kenoka had to reintroduce himself to Ultimo. And Ultimo was like, "Oh, sure, brother, nice to see you again." Like, yeah, I definitely remember training you. Wink, wink.
Right. So and of course, Kenoka would have been a Toryumon X student.
That's right. That's right.
It all comes full circle, guys.
It's amazing. Okay, so we continue on the timeline here. That is the first 3 months of Toryumon X. All the notes, all the records we have say this is going to be Tajima's promotion. They're coming. They're training in Mexico. They're going to do what the first two classes did. Toryumon X is next. It's going to be Power Fighters, and it's going to be Tajima's promotion. We now go to September of 2002, and we pivot completely away from Mexico, completely away from Toryumon, and we have to talk about All Japan Pro Wrestling because it is uniquely intertwined in the history of Toryumon X. We go to the September 23rd, 2002 Wrestling Observer newsletter, and Dave says in the All Japan section that Nikon Sports on September 18th reported that All Japan and the Fuji TV network had reached an agreement and that it would publicly announce on September 30th at All Japan's party where Motoko Baba would step down and turn over the company to Mutoh, that All Japan and Fuji TV had reached an agreement, and for Muto's first act as president, he would make a big announcement. At the time, it wasn't clear if it would be a weekly TV show or a monthly show like All Japan Women had before being canceled, but as we learned on that September 30th All Japan event where All Japan officially separated itself from Baba and became Muto's promotion, that there was a deal in place that would unite All Japan, K1, and Pride, and those promotions together would begin running what would be known as the first incarnation of Wrestle One.
Yeah, so this was a big thing because of the status of Pride and more so K1. K1 in 2002 really was nearing it. I feel like, and I'm not much of a kickbox person, I'm sorry if I get this wrong. My impression always was that in the early 2000s, K1 really kind of hit its peak, and then Pride came in, and I luckily was able to. The fun thing about Pride case was that was at a time that Best Buy still really did DVDs, and like the Pride DVDs were awesome, and they were always like $8, and they're like really well done. But this was all under kind of the aegis of Dream Stage Entertainment. And one of the big things at this time, and especially in the late 90s into early 2000s, were like big pay-per-view Sky Perfect events, and that's what this kind of ends up being, which is interesting enough because it was like all about Fuji TV, and instead these were pay-per-views.
That is a great point. That makes all of this make even less sense than it already did.
Right, unless I might be wrong, in case when you read over the next note, I will be searching this myself. Unless Fuji TV and Sky Perfect are affiliated in some fashion, does not make a whole lot of sense to me that they would do that.
No, of course not. Now, the nice thing is, if you're unfamiliar with this sort of stuff, you know, even as we record this, like Dave's taken a beating over the last week. Dave is so in his bag with K1 and Pride in this era. Some of the best observers I've ever read are the observers at the end of 2003, the New Year's Eve 2003 K1 and Pride, and there might have even been one more. There might have been a UFC show that day also. But all of the big MMA New Year's Eve stuff that was, you know, a huge deal for years and years and years, Dave is so up on all of that. And his coverage, even though, like, you know, I've seen the Pride Library stuff that matters, and I enjoy it. And I'm sure I would be into K1 if I ever sat down and watched it. But it's some of Dave's best writing ever. You know, especially non-obituary division. Go read the observers from the end of 2003 into the first like 2 or 3 from 2004. It is some of the best Dave writing there is. I really highly recommend it. So Dave is in his bag here. And after that announcement, which was all set up on September 30th. Go ahead, Mike.
So I can confirm Fuji TV has major ownership of Sky Perfect. So
okay, that makes more sense.
Within the family. But as someone who did not know that and was trying to piece that together, point of clarification, instead of going on TV, they went on pay-per-view.
Interesting. Okay, so that all leads us, and thank you for clarifying that, because that just, this all doesn't make sense, but it at least makes more sense now. That leads us to All Japan Pro Wrestling Wrestle 1 from the Yokohama Arena in 2002. Now, I'll quickly go over this. I want to read these notes here. There's no Toryumon guys on this show, but it sets the stage for what is to come when Toryumon does get the invite. So the November 25th, 2002 Wrestling Observer newsletter, Dave says, one of the strangest big shows of all time, the Wrestle 1 event co-promoted by K1 and Pride under the banner of All Japan Pro Wrestling looked like a disaster waiting to happen. The major problem was, due to all sorts of problems negotiating with various talent, only 2 matches were even announced a week before the show. The complete lineup, including an appearance by Bill Goldberg, wasn't announced until 2 days before the show. And to make things stranger, just hours after the announcement was made of the Goldberg versus Rick Steiner match, Goldberg had posted on his website that despite what was being said in Japan, he wasn't going over. Over the next day, after further talk, since the Japanese had already announced him, and it was imperative that he came, they changed some things and talked him into coming. He never called anyone to make a change in his website story, which was still saying he wasn't going even after the match was over. The late sales over the past 2 days after the card, and particularly Goldberg, were announced was strong, ending with 12,807 fans. Had he not appeared, it would have been a disaster for the credibility of Keiji Muto and All Japan, and its first high-profile show since the end of the Baba era. In reality, most of the booking and negotiating for the show was done by Satoharu Tanagawa of K1. It also would have doomed a hoped January 19th follow-up at the Tokyo Dome. The fact that they failed to sell out Yokohama means the Dome is going to be a tough sell. Mike, I will pause there. Your thoughts on just all of this nonsense?
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
Yeah, I think that we have to kind of take stock of where the industry was in 2002, which was basically being put into the dumpster by K1 and Pride and trying to react and act like K1 and Pride and lessening their appeal in the future. You
Very
know,
much so.
this was, hey, Bob Sapp's the biggest star in the world right now. Legitimately, the TV ratings for Bob Sapp were insane in the early 2000s, that you kind of like everyone was trying to get involved with it. And I think at that time, that's what made Toryumon 2000 project feel so different and really stands out. Was you looked at All Japan going through this huge transition at this point. New Japan is just flailing and Noah is doing all right. And you have like this really bizarre thing because everyone just wanted to get in bed with this. They wanted to make sure. Like, and it just, instead, what you got is something that when we close this all up, we'll talk about what came from the Wrestle One experiment afterwards. And that's kind of what it ended up more so being than actually wrestling trying to emulate MMA.
Again, this will all tie back into Toryumon X. So if you're lost and you're wondering why we're breaking down 2002 All Japan, hang tight. Mike, I'm going to skip past in our notes here some of the Hulk Hogan stuff. We will talk about that when we talk about the January show. But Dave continues here. He says, the show, which featured some of the most elaborate special effects ever on a Japanese pro wrestling show, lasted less than 3 hours, which is much shorter than Japanese pay-per-view events traditionally last. Of the last four matches were taped for a 1-hour television special on Fuji TV, airing on November 26th at 7 p.m., with Masahiro Chono doing the television announcing. Their feeling is, because it had K1 level production values, that the casual TV viewer will enjoy it as a great show, as opposed to wrestling fans who wouldn't have liked it because it didn't contain great matches. Dave then goes on to note that it featured, obviously Bob Sapp and Mark Coleman and Kevin Randleman, also Kawal Uno of UFC, and then luchadors like La Parka and Super Parka and Dos Caros Jr., and then the roster of All Japan. It is truly one of the weirdest looking shows ever. And then Dave closes out here by saying, Mutoh did indeed announce another joint show for January 19th at the Tokyo Dome, which will be a pay-per-view show. All Japan also has a pay-per-view date on December 6th for the tag team tournament. Mutoh, when making the announcement of that show, the Tokyo Dome show, said he wanted to use Bob Sapp and Hulk Hogan as the headliners. Hashimoto confirmed that he would also appear on that show. The Hogan situation, as noted last week, becomes very tricky because it's a few days before the WWE Raw shows in Tokyo, and while Hogan has fulfilled the maximum number of dates on his WWE contract, the time frame is through the end of January. Goldberg will probably face Takayama on that show, either in a single or perhaps in a tag with Hogan as his partner.
Yeah, this is just, at this point, Mutoh, for how everything went with Pro Wrestling Noah, was in the bag much before that. I mean, like, how else can he really like describe it as other than he's trying to wheel and deal, and the problem with him is he was never a great wheeler or dealer. He just kind of made things kind of work a little bit.
Very much so. So we'll table All Japan. We've got to go to December 7th, 2002. This stuff is also on the network. Young Dragons Cup 2002. It's, I would say, one of the great vanity tournaments in Dragon System history, in the same way that BB Hulk and Akira Tozawa winning Summer Adventure Tag League 2011 was, or Ben K winning King of Gate 2019. This was the Taiji Ishimori tournament. He beats Henry III Sugawara in the opening match. He beats Jun Agauchi in the semifinals, and he beats Dadi Shuji in the finals. If you look through the history of the Young Dragon Cups, especially through this tournament, pre-split, so 97 through 2002, it's Magnum, it's Genki, it's Kanda, it's Milano, it's Owashi right before his big push, and then it's Ishimori. Ultima wasn't tricking anybody with these bookings. The winner of the Young Dragons Cup was who he thought was best in class, and in 2002, it was obviously Taiji Ishimori.
Yeah, and the more notable thing on this is Dottie being much more Taiji's senior and losing the match.
Yep, exactly. I mean, this is this is the difference, because Toryumon Mexico, you go back and you look at their schedule, right? We talked about their show in August where there was no mention of Taiji Ishimori in the notes. The next time they run is December. It's the Young Dragons Cup. And who's in the main event now? Who's the guy getting the massive push? It's Taiji Ishimori. This really, for all intents and purposes, December 7th, 2002 is when Toryumon X becomes what we began to know it as.
And the Taiji Ishimori show, essentially. Which,
exactly.
If you look at everything, and when we talk about the show itself, makes sense, but it's one of those unfortunate things that just never pans out.
So we transition to 2003, January 19th to be exact. This is the second Wrestle 1 show from the Tokyo Dome, and I will read Dave's write-up here in The Observer. He says, the story of the Wrestle 1 show on January 19th at the Tokyo Dome epitomized nearly everything that could be done wrong to promote a show. When we left off last week, just days before the show, only a few matches had been announced after Hulk Hogan decided not to accept a huge offer to work the main event. From reports from those very close to the negotiations, Hogan, who doesn't keep up to date on wrestling when he's not in it and has little knowledge of the Japanese scene, understood things very quickly. He recognized Wrestle 1 as a promotion willing to spend a lot of money, but with no direction, ideas, or future plans. He quickly came to the conclusion the mentality of the group was the same thing that killed WCW, and it would only hurt him in the market long-term to work the show because it would reflect badly on him when it bombed. He met with a dozen people in the company for about 4 hours before the event and spent most of the time doing the talking, explaining to them why doing the idea of 4 baby faces thrown together in a tag match with no build-up and no idea of where it's going made no sense. None of the Wrestle 1 people were able to grasp his old-school wrestling mentality of wanting things to make sense and build. Everybody brace yourself for this next sentence. Hogan did say he was willing to work a singles match and do a clean job for either Yoshihiro Takayama or Naoya Ogawa, thinking he could get himself over by losing, but they didn't accept the proposal. Mike, I will pause there. Your thoughts?
So at this time, it's worth noting that this is Takayama at his MMA peak.
This is Takayama Mania. He is the guy.
So this is Hulk, like, weirdly knowing a lot more about Pride than he knew about this wrestling scene. Ogawa at that time in 2003, like, I knew he was affiliated, but I don't know necessarily what was Nagoya Ogawa up to.
He's like 0-1 at this point. It's him because one of the
that's right. That's right, because 0-1 is feuding with All Japan, or they're attempting to do that feud.
So one of the ideas that Dave mentioned in The Observer for the first Wrestle 1 show is Ogawa and Hashimoto teaming up to wrestle. Who were they going to wrestle on that show? Let me find that real quick. They were going to wrestle the Sylvester Terkay tag team. It was going to be, okay, so the proposed match was Hashimoto and Ogawa versus Hulk Hogan and Sylvester Terkay, with the idea being of Hashimoto and Ogawa as the modern version of Baba and Inoki, who are considered the country's greatest tag team of all time, and Hogan and Predator, which was Terkay's Japanese name, as a symbolic version of Hogan and Bruiser Brody from the 1980s.
Which is just like...
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, like, we'll say this about Dream Stage. They had some ideas.
They did. If they would have executed half of their proposed ideas, way different promotion.
They'd be in the Hall of Fame. They'd be in the Hall of Fame.
Hogan would own Dream Stage Entertainment. It would be going strong to this day. I fucking love the audacity of Hogan to say that he would do a clean job for Yoshihiro Takayama. That wasn't fucking happening. I love that.
And I mean, the fact, I'll just want to touch on this real quick. Takayama finds out about this.
Yes, so that's the next paragraph. So thank you. So Dave says, things got even worse in the days preceding the event. The idea was to do a Keiji Muto and Bill Goldberg versus Hulk Hogan and Yoshihiro Takayama match. However, Takayama, when he found out that Hogan was willing to do a job for him and the promotion turned it down, got upset and also pulled out of the event. No shit, Takayama, good for you.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You're not going to get anything like that's classic Hogan, that Mutoh and Goldberg versus Hogan Takayama. Like that's what you expect out of 1998 Hogan. Like that doesn't work for me, brother, right? Like he wants to team with the popular young guy and get that pop. Like that's his bread and butter. But so like the fact that Takayama heard that Hogan was going to job to him, my God, like at that point, Takayama must be thinking like, I'm going to be rebuilding this industry in my image.
Oh my God. The audacity. I mean, that's one of the all-time great Hulk Hogan lies, is that he
and no one talks about this.
He claimed to Dream Stage Management that he would do a clean job to Yoshihiro Takayama in 2002. That wasn't fucking happening. Dave goes on to say basically. Oh, go ahead.
It's just, I love it so much. It's just like I could almost see a little bit Hogan saying like, "Oh yeah, I saw the fight that he had with Don Fry, brother. Like, yeah."
But then like,
gonna get me some of that. Maybe I'll dye my mustache back.
Well, Jesus, great idea. But then like, whether it's Takayama or Ogawa, like Hogan, this is 2002 Hogan. He can't take that beating.
Oh my God! Like,
I mean, Ogawa would have killed him.
Ogawa would have killed him. Takayama, just for how big he was, like, and how he would throw people around at times. Like, how can like Hogan take bumps like that?
No, it would have been totally impossible. Dave goes on to say that Goldberg spent all of his money on a classic car, and then they tried to get Sting and Lex Luger on the show, and then they couldn't get them on the show for $100,000 each, and so they booked Bryan Adams and Brian Clark for $25,000 each, which is just very funny for some reason.
Chronic.
Dave says, and later on in the Observer, he goes, "The result of a goofy series of matches made no sense. With a crowd of about 20,000 people on the January 19th Tokyo Dome show, but much of that was papered as they were handing out free tickets all over the area the day of the show. The idea is to make it look good for a 1-hour primetime TV special based around Sap's appearance on the January 21st Fuji Network show, and to try to claim a public success with an announced crowd of a ridiculous 45,371 fans."
Sick.
So we talk about this show. This all comes together now because while match 1 was a bloody Abdul the Butcher match that would not end.
A lot of these matches would not end, Case. Like, let's be fair.
I understand this was right after the Sheik died. He dedicated the match to the Sheik. Very nice. Whatever. Still a bad match. Match number 2 on this show. And again, we're talking about a show that almost had Hulk Hogan versus Yoshihiro Takayama on it. Match number 2, Taiji Ishimori, Henry Sugawara, and Anthony W. Mori versus Kandari Shuji, Yoshino, and Milano Collection AT in the Taiji Ishimori Japanese landing match, a match that felt completely and utterly out of place in the Tokyo Dome.
Yeah, it's a real like wild thing, because one thing that we have to like note for, I mean, there might be listeners here who've never seen a Pride show. Pride was known more so than any other combat sport, wrestling, boxing, MMA, to be about entrances and about production and about things feeling big. And it was like the most majestic Italicon entrance ever. And like the flag that Pescatore had was like genuinely 12 feet diagonally. Like, it was an enormous Italian flag.
It really goes to show Milano, even with that gimmick, could have gotten over anywhere. It really, Milano on this show actually reminded me of Takeshita in the G1, where Milano, much like Takeshita in his early years, was such a specific thing that was so valuable to one specific promotion, but he could take that same act anywhere and get over with it. And, you know, by the time Milano actually got to New Japan wasn't in great shape, and Milano physically wasn't in great shape, and he still got over there to a large degree. And Takeshita, somehow AEW has become like a roadblock, which doesn't make any sense. But if he was going to show up in New Japan, he doesn't have to change a thing. You know, the same thing that's got Takeshita over everywhere would work in New Japan. And you saw it with Milano on this show, where that act, I mean, this was a dead crowd and a crowd that did not care about this match, and a match that quite honestly kind of died a death in this giant room. But Milano looked like a superstar.
Yeah, and it was one of those we didn't really get to see all that much of Taiji working necessarily with the Toryumon Japan crowd. Taiji and Kondo, even at this point, and it was shown in the Young Dragons Cup, but more so here, the chemistry between those two was awesome. And it's a shame we don't talk about Kondo as like all-time power wrestlers, because just the state of like, if he stayed in Dragongate his entire career, we'd be talking about him as like, oh my god, he was a junior heavyweight, but he wrestled like a super heavyweight, because the way that he wrestled against the Royal Brothers, you just watch and you're just going, well, Christ, Kandari Tsuji is a man. It's incredible.
Mike, everything that Shingo and Hulk accomplished, the blueprint was Ishimori and Kondo.
Absolutely. My God.
That is
what they could have done together.
It had they all stayed together, because they all go their own ways, and Ishimori and Kondo, as the years would go on, they would find each other in various promotions. It's Shingo and Hulk. That's what they were doing, just without the through line and the emotional gravitas that Hulk and Shingo were granted just by staying in one place for all that time.
Absolutely not. So the finish, it's worth noting that Taiji Ishimori at this time, the superstar elbow was kind of his finish, was a handspring backflip elbow. Never looked good. This time he did a Rolling Thunder Hurricane Rana, and this was the one pop the crowd went, because the crowd was like, damn, that's awesome. He, like, if that was his finish instead of the superstar elbow, I'm not saying that Toryumon X would have survived, but I would have felt a lot better about it, because it was legitimately like a really impressive move that even a cold crowd. Case, I did look up a number while you were talking there. Take a guess what the paid attendance for the Wrestle One show was.
Oh God, I don't know. 15,000.
So on the February 3rd, 2003 Wrestling Observer newsletter, in the All Japan portion, the paid attendance of the W1, that's how Dave referred it to, makes it real difficult to find stuff about it. The Wrestle One show on July 19th was only 6,000, with just over 20,000 in total in attendance. That would be the lowest paid attendance for a wrestling event at the Tokyo Dome ever. Even the 8-8 UFO show, which was Inoki's MMA attempt, drew more pay. However, since the show drew a strong TV rating, some internally are trying to say it was a success, even though the most reviews of the show were strongly negative as well. The primetime TV airing of the Bob Sapp Entertainment special covering the W1 show drew a 10-4 rating, which made pretty big success in that regard. But we can't count that, because Sapp right now is such a huge TV star that using that to indicate that they were on the right track was so misleading.
Good Lord. What a disaster. So there's the Ishimori Japanese landing, and when you zoom out of it and you watch all this stuff in hindsight, it seems like Ultimo's idea, whether it would have been with Tajima or it would have been with Ishimori, was super rookie guy that's going to win immediately no matter what. Because Ishimori, this is his Japanese debut. It is in the Tokyo Dome, and he is the one who pins not Yoshino and not Milano, but still Shuji Kondo. That is a massive, massive win for your debut match, and I would say Ishimori did not rise to the occasion, something that we'll continue to say on this show. You know, to me, the star of that match was Milano.
That's fair. I thought that Dottie was it.
That's true. Man, he's Dottie, so good.
2002 through 2004, Shuji Kondo, one of my low-key favorites.
Yeah, and not the period of his career that's discussed.
No. I mean, because he was always either the third or fourth guy in any Italian Connection match. If you had like the full complement, because it was always going to be Milano, Yoshino, and Yasini, and then it was Dottie. Like, God.
So on the show also, the reason all the Toryumon kids were there was match number 4 was Ultimo Dragon and Kaz Hayashi versus Ultimo Guerrero and Rei Bucanero, who had just done tag matches with Ultimo in December of 2002 for Ultimo's comeback. Ultimo Guerrero and Rei Bucanero at this point, one of the hottest tag teams in all of the world. This one's 1740. It's Ultimo and Kaz Hayashi versus, like I said, Ultimo Guerrero and Rei Bucanero. The Ultimo Dragon, Ultimo Guerrero interactions in this match were awesome.
Yeah, these are guys that even I don't know when Ultimo Guerrero started really doing that gimmick in Mexico, I feel like there would have been some crossover, though. Like, there was just such easy, natural chemistry with those. Yeah, no, he would have been in CMLL right as Ultimo was finishing up during that time span. But like Los Infernales were like the best tag. I would say that pairing was one of the best tag teams of the last 25 years, easily.
If you go back and read F4Ws from this era, which if you've never, here's the thing, if you've never read
when Brian used to like do work,
watch wrestling, yes, and used to be excited about wrestling, because that's the thing. If you've never read an F4W from this era, Brian Alvarez's writing is awesome, and he's watching all the North American stuff, but he's also watching CMLL. And you would think he's writing about Jesus and God as a tag team the way he writes about Ultimo and Rey Bucanero. Like, just over the moon about them. Really, really fun match there. Kind of the best thing on a show that was headlined by
Ernesto Hus versus Bob Sapp, which
Ernesto
was incredibly
Hus
bad.
versus Bob Sapp, Bill Goldberg and Keiji Muto versus Chronic, Shinya Hashimoto versus Joe Sun. Oh, what a disaster this show was.
Yeah, it ruled. it is worth, like, if you are a bad wrestling fan, it's worth going out of your way for, if only because if you're someone who's heard if you're someone who's heard like Bob Sapp talked about in nebulous terms, you really ought to watch Bob Sapp in his prime, like in his drawing prime. Like, the whole entire show is basically a vanity project for him, and he is the only like big star as received by the crowd.
We go back to the Toryumon USA archives. This is an entry from Jay on January 20th of 2003. He says, a couple more notes out of the Wrestle One show. Ultimo, for some godforsaken reason, has stated he looks forward to returning to the next Wrestle One show. All objectivity aside here, Ultimo is stupid. He goes out in front of the worst crowd in Tokyo Dome history, watches his kids, who are far and away the best performers on the card along with Infernales, get little to no reaction for a great match, not to mention his own, and he still wants to come back. More than ever, the WCW Nitro nostalgia sideshow that Ultimo and his ego are pushing are a danger to Toryumon's well-being. Taiji spoke about Toryumon X after the match, asking Maury and Henry to aid them. X would seem to only have 3 or 4 stars that are ready to appear in Japan, so I would be surprised to see them to begin to come over so quickly. Hopefully Taiji, this is Jay editorializing here, hopefully Taiji stays for the upcoming Corkin shows and wrestles. Yoshino and Milano put Taiji over, saying he was much stronger than they were when they faced him last summer. I guess we should all get ready to have Taiji all over the place like we did with Milano during the T2P arrival.
I mean, Jay pegged it.
He nailed it. I mean, look, The Ultimo stuff is real. When Ultimo became a full-time Dragongate guy 5 years ago, I was concerned that we would get WCW Nitro stars on Dragongate.
It was not a smooth transition. Like, there were still bumps with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No, this is Jay in 2003 really nailing what was to come, because you got to remember, December of 2002 is like the Norman Smiley Perry Saturn appearance.
Right, yeah.
So that's what he's referring to there. So he's right on the money there. Something I just now thought about, kind of as this all ties together. So if there's not a split and Ultimo stays in power with Toryumon 2004, 2005, 2006, do you think instead of the litany of U.S. indie workers that come over, do you think Toryumon and CMLL become a talent trading station essentially, and we get like young Mystico and Toryumon?
I think you might get like Karante. I don't think you would. I think when Mystico became Mystico and like took off the way he did, he became much more of a bigger star.
It's tough though, because he was supposed to be on that first Dragon Door show. He didn't get on the plane.
Yeah, no, you're not wrong about that. I would say, given the patterns, if we're talking Shimaism versus Ultimoism, Ultimo would always defer to Mexico. So I think I think it's far more likely. I think that Shima was the one that always was on the pulse of the American scene, and that probably means that if Ultimo stuck around, if Shima was still there, Ultimo would have won out, and it would have been CMLL probably at that time.
And I think, part of that is, as time has gone on, I think we've come to see that Shima really appreciates Mexican wrestling. But when Dragongate became Dragongate, they made a conscious effort of, we are not the Japanese Mexican promotion. We are not the promotion in Japan that is uniquely tied to Mexico. We're going to do our own thing. And so I think it was a conscious effort to lean into the US Indies the way that they did. But if Ultimo's there, he's working CMLL still. Yeah, I think you're just getting like, instead of Jack Evans, you're getting Mystico.
Yeah, or like Volador Jr. at the point.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another good one. Yeah, that totally changes everything.
Which would have matched up because Dos Caras Jr. Was very tight with Ultimo and Nakapon. Super Parka, you know who Super Parka is, right? Volador Sr.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So I think Volador Jr. and Dragongate would have been a very possible outcome if that would have happened.
So that is the business of All Japan Wrestle 1. Taiji Ishimori's Japanese landing happens on that show. Ultimo seems excited to work with him again. That never happens. It does take us to January 27th, 2003. This is the final T2P show. Taiji Ishimori is introduced to the Korakuen crowd before the show. They don't show this on TV, but they do show the highlights of both his Wrestle 1 match and Ultimo's Wrestle 1 match. Taiji would then go back to Mexico February 22nd, 2003. This is the Yamaha Cup, which is the tag team tournament that Toryumon Mexico would always do.
Right. You
Who
win
wins
scooters.
Say that again?
You win scooters.
You literally win Yamaha scooters. That's why it's called the Yamaha Cup. Who wins the tournament? But Taiji Ishimori and Shu Sato. They defeated Small Dandy Fuji and Suasita in the finals of that tournament. Again, that footage is on the Dragongate network.
I'm looking at night one. The main event of night one is Los Guerreros de Infernos, the Rey Bucanero, Tarzan Boy, and Ultimo Dragon defeat Jun Ukagayuchi, Shocker, and Ultimo Dragon.
Holy
Ultimo
shit.
Guerrero. What a wild match. Yeah,
that's really something. Holy cow. I did not look at that card in full. I was not expecting that main event. So we see now, we're 6 full months removed from the departure of Hasimaru Tajima. So it's Ishimori winning Young Dragon. It's Ishimori debuting in the Tokyo Dome. It's Ishimori winning Yamaha Cup. You go to May 11th, 2003. This is the Toryumon Mexico anniversary show. It's also the final show that Ultimo worked before going to WWE, which I have more on in just a second. What happens on this show? Taiji Ishimori. He wins the UWA World Welterweight belt. It was vacant. He beat Super Crazy and now had a title to go into the Toryumon X debut show.
Elsewhere on the show, Crazy Max defend the UWA trios versus Black Terry, El Guerrero, and Jose Luis in the main event. A Super Porky, Shocker, and Ultimo Dragon defeat Nitro, Peroth Jr., and Valencia.
So this show is obviously clipped, but whereas like the Young Dragons Cup and the Yamaha Cup, those are just tiny highlights at the start of Vamonos Amigo episodes. This whole show is a Vamonos Amigo episode. So most of this is on tape in some form or fashion.
Of course, because Ultimo wants this farewell show.
Exactly. And Taiji Ishimori versus Super Crazy is the other thing that feels like a big deal on that show. And it's a fine match, but it's once again Taiji Ishimori winning. Let me ask you this, and this is something I'll probably throw to Jay next time we talk to him. But okay. I don't know if you can speak to this at all. I guess I'm curious if you can. Ultimo leaving for WWE. What sort of impact do you think that had specifically on Toryumon X, if there was an impact at all?
I think that it unmoors it. I think that, like, for T2P, Ultimo was, like, front and center. Like, he was, like, dictating stuff. Like, for Toryumon Japan, you had Ultimo, like start, like, trying to raise up Dragongate after the main event. You don't have him really here for that. And I think that it kind of changes things around a bit.
I think that's well put. So Ultimo's gone. Toryumon X is here. They confirm on July 2nd, 2003 that the show will take place August 22nd at Differ Ariake, which, as Jay notes in his old archive, which put Toryumon X 3 months ahead of schedule from when those guys debuted compared to when the T2P guys debuted and then landed in Japan. That in itself is such a massive issue. If you just would have let these guys train a little bit longer in Mexico and debuted them at the start of 2004, maybe, I think it could have been an entirely different scenario But this also, and this is unanswerable questions, Ultimo might have pushed this knowing that something was coming even by the spring of 2003.
Yeah, at this point, I think that even though there might not have been like immediate like red flags to him, I think that you like look at where the promotion is when he's around and when it is without, and who is pushed and who isn't pushed, and who as a now, I mean, you're talking about wrestlers who are not like for like Milano, he's past his 5-year anniversary at this point. Like these are real veteran wrestlers. I can see Ultimo, like as much as like Jay kind of lampooned him and he called him stupid. Ultimo is not the dumbest person in the room.
Well, he's always been politically savvy. I mean, this is something that really became obvious just how long he's been doing this. When we did in January, we did the story of how Toryumon came to be. And, you know, I mean, like we said then, Ultimo was the highest paid foreign wrestler in the history of Mexican wrestling when he signed his CMLL contract. He was actually specifically the highest paid foreign wrestler at any point in wrestling history that we have knowledge of when he signed his CMLL contract. It was more than Mutoh made for WCW. He has been an industry power player for, as we record, close to 40 years.
Right. And it's one of those things I feel like with like Ogawa, or even more so the state of, I'm talking about Yoshinari Ogawa, to be clear. And the state of the third generation in New Japan Pro Wrestling, like Ultimo is older than the third generation of pro wrestling. Like he's older than Yuji Nagata. I mean, I did an experiment to see who was wrestling when I was alive, and Ultimo comes very close to it, Case, and I'm almost 40. So he is a lot more of a presence than I think the world realized.
That takes us finally to August 21st, 2003. There was an article in Nikon Sports which talks about Toryumon X and then in the anticipation of their debut. It mainly discusses how with an average height of 167 centimeters, all of the Toryumon X wrestlers were once considered to be too small to succeed, and that the goal of X is to, quote, smash all preconceptions.
Smash, huh? Okay.
Mike, that is the Toryumon X timeline. Do you have anything else you want to add to help paint the picture of how we got to this debut show?
I think we should really, like, 167 centimeters kind of becomes the story of this brand at that point. Like, when they talked to Nikon Sports, whatever that they were trying to kind of accomplish with it, and considering what all they did with Taiji Ishimori, building him up, leading up to the landing, I'm not saying that you cut him off at the heels, but you have like 100. You make a big point about this as short guys are told no, and then you put on a card that is all about them being short guys.
Again, Ishimori, Young Dragons Cup winner, Tokyo Dome debut, wins the Tokyo Dome debut, Yamaha Cup winner, UWA welterweight champion, all before this Toryumon X show. They couldn't have done more with him without eyeballs on him to make him seem like a big star. And it takes us, and I will now turn it back to you, to August 22nd, 2003.
So this is all up on the network. It's actually, the interesting thing about this, 70 minutes is the Toryumon X premiere show. We only get 4 of the 5 matches. One of the matches does not make tape, but we lead.
Is it not even on the non-network version? I didn't bother to look.
I did not look, but I don't remember when I've watched this in the past seeing the match that is not up on the network. Don Fuji defeats Henry the Third Sugawara with a nice German 747. Not brought up really.
Yeah.
Like it's just deleted from history. Instead, we get an opener. It's Naoki Tanizaki in the opener versus. I'm going to refer to him by his modern name. He was a character in our Remember This Guy thing. He was, it's Pineapple Hanai, aka Ken 45. At this point, Kenichi Hanai and Naoki Tanizaki wins with a surfing clutch in 9:43.
So, Naoki Tanizaki should have been given everything Taiji Ishimori was given, right?
Oh, he comes off like an absolute star.
This is the Tanizaki show.
Mm-hmm. And especially with the fact that I know that this did not make tape, they immediately went into Surfer versus Surfer after this.
Yeah.
They
No,
knew
you're
that
exactly
Tanizaki,
right.
they knew that Naoki Tanizaki had like more of a sinker in this. Like there was meat on the bone with him. Whereas you look at Sailor Boys and they just basically just shove them out of the nest with a giant weight attached to their ankles.
I wonder if with Tanizaki, he wasn't small to a point that it was a gimmick like Ishimori, but he also wasn't big. You know, he was like too tall and too small at the same time.
Yeah.
And in the specific confines of like, hey, we're launching a mini promotion around you, there's nothing remarkable about Tanizaki other than he's way better than everybody else on this show. And the way that he pins Hanai in really dominant fashion, you go, oh, he could have been the Milano of this group. It would have been very easy.
And it makes sense, like with how everything happened, at least when they started integrating Toryumon X guys, it made sense why Naoki was the first one. Like
this is where I maybe confused isn't the right word. This is where I get so curious about the power structure at this time,
right?
And who knew what when, because it seemed like, and you tell me if you disagree, but it seemed like Magnum took a liking to Naoki, and if Magnum knew something was coming, this is now 11 months ahead of the eventual split. You know, there was definitely an effort to be like, oh, Naoki Tanizaki, like he's Toryumon X, but he's Toryumon, he's one of us, and no one else on this roster ever got that treatment.
And he had the Dragongate sticker on the surfboard.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know. That was my big takeaway from this show, because it's downhill from here. But Tanizaki versus Hanai is a really fun opening match. Now, it's not remarkable in the same way that it didn't have the energy of the Toryumon debut show. It certainly didn't have the energy of anything that happened on the T2P show, the debut show. But I don't know, one match in, it's like, all right, Toryumon X has some life. Go Naoki Tanizaki.
And I think that it was smart to kind of have like someone who matches the thread of the promotion in a way. Like, like you already had a surfer, and I mean, Genki Horiguchi, I mean, still was in a very young part of his career, but it was already showing something. And having that more so than we'll get into many Crazy Max later, that felt more of the generation other than cosplaying and being forced to do other wrestlers' moves, you know, like that felt like it was more of the promotion, which like to take us into the second match. Another thing that, at least for me, I thoroughly enjoyed were the Arai brothers, Kenichiro and Koichiro Arai, aka Taro Nohashi, defeating Iwasa Gundam, Takamichi Iwasa, still a demon, and Raimu Mishima. Yeah,
this is probably the thing I enjoyed on this show the second most, because
this is the thing I enjoyed the most. Yeah,
the Arakan tag team is the one. Well, they committed to this, and so it worked. Mini Shima, who is now Sugi, is so incredible at being Mini Shima, but they don't wrestle each other until 2021. I looked this up earlier today, not to get ahead of ourselves, but the first time that Shima and Sugi ever wrestled, and this was a tag, obviously, there was never a singles match between these two, was 2021, which is a bummer because Sugi is a great Mini Shima. They actually committed to this Arakan stuff, and man, did it work out. This was a lot of fun too.
Notable, Shima only appears on one of the Toryumon X shows.
Yes.
Like there's level detachments there. But I mean, to the extent that that you had the finish, which was a double headbutt, and Koichiro Taro does the short one, and Arakan does maybe the most impressive diving headbutt I've ever seen.
It's a good one.
It is, what, 80% of the ring diagonally?
Just about, yeah.
Incredible stuff. It was fun. And I mean, Iwasa and Mishima, this was before the Florida Brothers, but they're still kind of working their comedy chops before the Florida Brothers would be a thing. Coincidentally, they become Michael and Daniel before the next Toryumon X show. So you have the dying days of that. That takes us to the absent Fuji and Henry the third match. Semi-main event, Los Caros Exoticos. Bertolet, a boxer, a.k.a. Shogo Jet Takagi. Murcielago, who most people probably know more as Shadow Phoenix, versus Takashi Minamo and Mango Fukuda, aka Bear Fukuda, of Los Salseros Japoneses. Takeshi Minamo gets the pin on Murcielago with the Loco Cutter. It's a neck breaker after a guitar shot on Murcielago.
So the thing that I'm interested with in this match, and eventually we will do some sort of El Dorado rewatch podcast that feels like the natural progression of what we're doing right now. I will have to eventually answer the question of, is Mango Fukuda / Bear Fukuda a good wrestler, or does he just have one of the best names of all time, and that's why I like him?
I think it's the name, because he was kind of bad in this.
I know.
He's charming. He's charming.
I see Bear Fukuda on a lineup. I'm like, oh, hell yeah, my man. Shout out Secret Base. And then it's never any good. And this match was no different. I was like, oh, Mango Fukuda, this will be good. And it wasn't that good.
Yeah, the wild thing, Takashi Minamo, I think he was 16 at this point. Like, he was crazy
he was
young.
16 at this point.
Yeah, ended up seeing a lot more in Minamo. Like, that's a guy that, like, we talk about sliding doors. Where does his career go if he actually gets like his late teen years and early 20s in Toryumon versus out in Michinoku Pro?
I didn't realize until now that he no longer wrestles.
Yeah, I think he retired 2012 or so.
So he was working up through 2020. His second
it wasn't
last match,
like full time though.
No, it looks like. Yeah, it looks like he slows down a little bit in 2013, but no, he slows down in 2017, and then comes back and wrestles about as full time as you could be for a Michinoku Pro wrestler in 2019, and then he wrestles the Toryumon reunion show, that first one, and then Michinoku Pro show against Sasuke in February of 2020, right before COVID, and has not wrestled since. He is not even 40 years old.
Yeah, that's wild. And
it's crazy. He's a guy that just should have had a better career.
If you think timeline wise, he was like a absolute peer of Kazuchika Okada at that point.
Yeah, true.
And I remember Minamo like getting a lot of pub. Like, he got like a Chikara date. Like, he was like the one that like Quack was like, I'm bringing in him. I'm not bringing in Pineapple Hanai. I'm not bringing in Mango Fukuda. I'm bringing in Takeshi Minamo.
He's got just a weird career, and is probably the most, I mean, other than, I guess if you want to say Kano or Fujita Hayata, he's the guy I associate most with 2010's Michinoku Pro.
Yeah, I would say so. Or like the Kowloon stable.
Yeah, but I'd probably go Minamo instead.
That's fair. The main event of the Toryumon X landing, it is a 4-on-3 handicap match. We have on one side the combined Crazy Max team. It is Suwa, of course, the original Suwa, Menishima, aka Sugi, Suasito, of course, Kagatora, and Small Dandy Fuji, aka Rase, take on Taiji Ishimori, Shu Sato of the Sailor Boys, along with Manabu Murakami. And Manabu Murakami will take a moment. It does a vaguely Murakami parody gimmick, but he basically wears a red loincloth, and then he like something, and then he pops like a Cancun tornado through the ropes. Like, it's weird, but it's over. Weirdly, like the crowd liked Murakami. Like, whereas I would be like, I don't know what I'm doing here with this guy. It felt such like a sleazy match, but all kinds of things happen in this match. We get Twin Magic, we get Don Fuji coming out, but in the end, we get Taiji Ishimori absolutely blowing the superstar elbow against Rase to get the win and to send us to a live. It's a live lip sync version of Keep On Journey.
It's just not a great match.
It's perhaps like 30 of like the worst minutes of Toryumon that happen. It sucks.
It's
Kagatora's the best part.
It's all so wrong because Ishimori has had a very good career. I would go as far to say, he's kind of washed now, but like, I love Ishimori at his peak, and it is just so obvious watching this that he is not ready for any of this.
No. I would say out of the Toryumon X class, there and people on the show, there are 4 Toryumon X people who are ready for this. Naoki Tanizaki, as we talked about earlier, very clearly was there. Makes sense with everything. Koichiro Arai, Taro Nahashi, because he was so dedicated to being an Arakan-Sito.
Yeah, in that gimmick, it worked.
In the gimmick, that worked. And then I would say it's Sugi, and the best one is Kagetora.
Yes.
Like, even at that point, Kagetora, and he's just cribbing Sua's stuff, he is already like showing ability more so than else. As we go on, as Toryumon X happens, he gets pinfalls. Like with like he's able to pens Naruki Doi on the 3rd show. Like,
isn't it funny?
Yeah.
Even as Suicida, like Kagetora is already showing signs of not being the best wrestler in the match, but just being this guiding hand that pushes everybody along. Like from this show onwards, he's had the same role his entire career.
Yeah, and it is like, and weirdly, he looks the exact same.
Yes,
like the 2 guys who look the exact same from 21 years ago. Naoki Tanizaki, good for you, man. You look great 21 years later. And then Kagetora, because I feel like Kagetora was born looking like Kagetora. Like he was born looking 35 years old.
Kagetora looks the same. Tanizaki looks the same. And it can't be overstated enough because he spent the rest of his career in a mask just how much Sugi looks like Shima.
Yeah. And he has like the punchability of him too.
I know, that's the bummer because
he's like a twerp, and he would have been like such a fun twerp for him.
he's doing Michinoku Arashima.
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly what he's doing, and it's such a bummer that there's never really any proper Shima versus Mini Shima interactions, because other than the Arakan guys who are just attached at the hip, he's the best of the Sitos. He's the best of the minis, and that's the one that probably gets the least play out of any of them.
Yeah, and like, you know how much I like through lines and like touch points. Suicito versus Minorita. Like, I think there's a lot in common there. Like, especially ability-wise. I mean, I would say that, of course, Sugi, one of the preeminent and most creative high flyers of all time, is different from Rita, who is just someone who at 5'1" is just pure force of will. But you look at these like 2 mascots thing, and it took them really until... I mean, because there were other attempts at doing mascots. I mean, Katsuo's Cyber Kong Sito failed. All of these like mascots have failed. Like the one that worked was Minorita. And I think it's kind of cool that like just by pure happenstance, like that we choose this episode to talk about, like considering how Minorita and Ishin at that Kata show was the clear highlight of that weekend. It's just kind of a fun through line.
So I'll end with this because I do have to run in a second.
Absolutely. Let's wrap it up.
I was looking ahead at the other Toryumon X shows, and I don't know if we'll talk about them. Again, these shows they're not even like fun bad. They're just not that interesting. That's why we spend so much time on the timeline, because there's just not a lot to break down on these shows. But
yeah, the Wrestle 1 show, I mean, say what it is, much more interesting than Toryumon X Landing.
Hogan like, losing clean to Takayama.
Yeah, I mean, Hogan threatening to job to Takayama should be like shouted from the rooftops. Everyone, we need to be talking more that Hulk Hogan tried to entice Dream Stage Entertainment to save their Tokyo Dome show because he wanted a job to Yoshihiro Takayama, who at that point in 2003, like I should have looked up the Shoe Pro Awards. I think he like swept everything that year.
It would make sense. I would believe that if you told me that. So
yeah.
I started looking ahead to see what was on the other shows, and they just fully transitioned into Sailor Boys versus Los Salseros, and unit versus unit. I get it, whatever. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, it's such a shame that the direction coming out of this show wasn't like Ishimori is the guy. Ishimori's had all these accolades, but Naoki Tanizaki thinks that should have been him. And then they could have built to Ishimori and Tanizaki in a program instead of Ishimori and the Sailor Boys against Los Salseros. I looked on Cage Match. Naoki Tanizaki and Taiji Ishimori have never wrestled each other in any capacity.
That's a hinge point.
That's insane.
Yeah, Toryumon X, like, if everyone got along for a year and they did this instead, the fall of 2004, I think, because then, like, reasonable discussion, you're talking about Shingo, because Shingo was not too far into 2005 until his debut. And you might be talking Hulk, too.
So I want to throw this at you. I guess I kind of already mentioned it with the Kondo and Ishimori thing being like Shingo and Hulk, but all I thought about watching Ishimori was, if he's just a year later, he's BB Hulk. He probably has the Magnum produced entrance. He has the same look. He's just he's a less clean version of BB Hulk, because when Hulk debuted, he was so good and that gimmick was so nailed down from the start. And Ishimori is not as good as Hulk when he was a rookie, and the gimmick isn't as nailed down as Hulk's was, and that's the difference.
And I would say they went too far with the gimmick.
Yes.
Like, at a certain point, like, there's a reason, like, Taiji Ishimori is probably the last, like, outstanding person for a Toryumon reunion, right? Like, if we're being honest in our hearts of hearts, there's certain people it's just probably not going to happen unless we're talking 20 years down the road, or it's already happened. Taiji now is that outlier.
Yeah, because it's not going to be Magnum. It's not going to be Shima. Okada
the money will never be there for Okada.
Exactly. Okada is friendly with Ultimo, and that in itself is their reunion. But we talked about this with Jay once, and I read this in a Weekly Pro interview that did a Google Translate for me before we did this podcast, where Ishimori gets asked about Sailor Boys, and he says the same thing that Jay told us when we asked about Ishimori coming in, which is Ishimori and Ultimo don't have a relationship. There's no hatred there, but they're not boys. And Ishimori is not interested in doing Sailor Boy stuff. He looks at it as a failure. It's from a point in his life that he doesn't want to revisit, and he seems to have no interest in revisiting it. And I don't think that's going to change, because I don't
blame him, to be fair.
No, exactly. I mean, Ishimori's had a bizarre career. This is the guy that had the Gangnam Style gimmick in Noah for the longest time. Like, he's been saddled with just the weirdest. Like, his career is worth its own podcast, because you think about, he's the Toryumon X failed ace. He's kind of the Dragon Door ace, but then he goes to Noah and he trains the Noah dojo, and he, credits Kotaro Suzuki with making him a better wrestler. And then he's just in Noah forever. He then has this North American career where it's like he's an Impact all the time. And then he winds up in New Japan and has had some of the highest profile junior matches in New Japan history.
It's wild. And I think you bring up the failed ace. He kind of is the first failure that comes out of Toryumon, in a way. Because you look at what happened in Toryumon Japan. You look what happened in T2P. We'll talk more about T2P and Toryumon Japan next month, by the way. And you just kind of look at it, and he is the one who kind of is saddled and has to wear the fact that he was the face of the brand that was not originally going to be about him. Like, he was thrust into this. Like, it makes total sense why he looks at this time period and is dismissive.
I think that's well said. I have to go.
Yep,
If anybody, I'm now realizing I have like another hour's worth of thoughts on Toryumon X. So if there's anything we didn't cover that people are wondering, drop it in the Discord, and we'll try to circle back to this next week.
Yeah, next week will be a fun episode as well, but we have Geita Miyane, Naruki Doi's homecoming show in Nara, but that's going to do it this week. Thanks for everyone for listening. You could follow us on Twitter at OpenVoiceGate, cases at _ in your case. I'm at Fujiheya. Thanks for listening to Open Voice Gate. We'll be back with you next time. Take care.
Do you like wrestling trivia? Then check out the 5-Star Match Game, the Pro Wrestling Quiz Show. I'm Joe Gagney, and every episode, I grill 3 contestants with 5 rounds of power-packed wrestling trivia. We have over 30 evergreen episodes in the archives covering WWE, AEW, Japan, Mexico, and much, 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 much more. Play along at home and check it out today.
If you're a facilities manager at a warehouse and your HVAC system goes down, it can turn up the heat, literally. But don't sweat it, Grainger has you covered. Grainger offers over 1 million industrial-grade products for all your operations, including warehouse HVAC maintenance. And even better, They offer access to experts and fast delivery, so you and your warehouse can both keep your cool. Call 1-800-GRANGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.